A flying shoe symbolizes widespread frustration with the U.S., even as George Bush continues to defend his Iraq policies. But as his time in power draws to a close, what will Bush be remembered for in Iraq? And how will his legacy shape the country's future? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Mariam Namazi. 5.5 years after coalition forces went into Iraq, President George Bush visited Baghdad on a farewell tour. His administration has spent millions of dollars on reconstruction in the aftermath of the 2003 invasion. As he prepares to hand over power to President-elect Barak Obama, George Bush has been met with public anger at the perceived occupation by coalition forces in Iraq. Bethan Howe has more.
President George Bush is pelted with shoes by an enraged journalist in a news conference in Baghdad. The president has been visiting Iraq and Afghanistan as he prepares to leave office. This week he experienced firsthand the impact his administration has had on the Iraqi people. 5 years ago, George Bush was preparing to invade. In the wake of the attacks on the World Trade Center in 2001 and the failure to track down Osama bin Laden, his presidency was under pressure. The US, backed by Britain, claimed that Saddam Hussein had access to weapons of mass destruction. So, in 2003, President Bush launched the invasion of Iraq.
If war is forced upon us, we will fight in a just cause and by just means, sparing in every way we can the innocent.
But minimal casualty figures were wishful thinking. Saddam Hussein was caught at the end of 2003, but the fighting continued, and no weapons of mass destruction were ever found. The Iraqi insurgency expanded quickly, and United States military losses kept increasing. It's estimated the war in Iraq has cost over 1 million people their lives. There have been some successes, including the country's first democratic elections after the fall of Saddam Hussein. In 2005, US forces began working with tribes and the awakening councils formed. And in 2007, the US began a new troop surge. The combination of working with Iraqi forces and greater US troop numbers is largely considered to be the reason behind the latest drop in violence. So far, the United States has spent over $100 billion on rebuilding Iraq. But this week, a report on reconstruction of the country stated the US has actually managed little more than restoring what had been destroyed during the invasion. Flying shoes may have left George Bush smiling, but it's an example of how many in Iraq and in other Middle East countries feel about his administration.
The Iraqi people object to the occupation. Now we are bound to go on a referendum over the Security Pact, and the US administration has to abide by its clauses. US troops will have to leave.
As President Bush's successor, Barak Obama inherits a troubled country where anger and resentment towards the US will not be easy to overcome. Bethan Howe for Inside Story.
Well, joining us now are our guests. In Baghdad, Mahmoud Othman, Kurdish member of the Iraqi parliament. In Kansas City, Thomas Mulcahanan, a columnist at the newspaper The Kansas City Star. And in Beirut, Amr Hamzawi, he's a senior associate at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Mr. Othman, if I can come to you first, why did Muntazar al-Zaidi do it? What made him take his shoes off and throw them at President Bush?
Well, I think that question today in Parliament, we had a session. There were some discussions about this issue, and we decided that it would be left to the court to decide. It's a case before the Iraqi justice system, and the Iraqi justice system would decide on it. We don't want to interfere in it or talk about it because we don't want to interfere with the decision with the justice system will do about this case, really. Of course, there are a lot of frustrations in the Iraqi society about the American activities during the last 5-6 years. And there are negative sides for it. Of course, every Iraqi, or most of the Iraqis, were happy to get rid of regime of Saddam Hussein because it was totalitarian and bad to its people, used force inside and outside to solve problem. But after that, during the last 5 years, there were a lot of negative things happening. And I think U.S. forces were responsible for it, and U.S. policy. They didn't have a decent policy about the Iraqi situation.
Well, let me put that to Mr. McClanahan. Do you agree with Mr. Osman that the incident symbolizes wider Iraqi displeasure with the war and the way it was conducted?
Well, it is never easy in any country to have foreign soldiers in uniform policing your streets and doing what you need to do to bring security. And these kinds of tensions are understandable. But the earlier point that the gentleman made, I think, is apposite, and that is that would the Iraqis certainly wouldn't want Saddam Hussein restored to power. And the difficulty of the occupation and the after the American invasion is pretty clear from the record, and didn't turn around until the surge began in early '07.
Amr Hamzawi, what does the shoe-throwing incident and the response to it, the fact that this man seems to have gained instant popularity, not just within Iraq, but within the wider region? There have been protests across the region, that widespread support for him. What does this say about Bush's legacy in Iraq?
Well, the wider picture in the region is quite divided. I mean, as you said, there has been some growing popular support for Montazir al-Zaidi for what he did. You just need to check different websites, blogs to see relatively a growing popular support for him. But on the other side, we have been seeing in different Arab newspapers in Iraq and outside Iraq very critical opinion pieces disapproving of the act of what Montazir al-Zaidi did. However, the whole debate, which is emerging as of now in the Arab world, definitely stands for a clear frustration in the region with regard to American policies in Iraq and in the region in general, and the wide perception in the Arab world among Arabs that this American administration has been maybe one of the worst American administrations we have been dealing with over the last decades. And so there is a growing sense of frustration, of relief that Bush is leaving, and in a way an understanding that, well, he might have deserved what happened to him, but as I said, we should not forget about a decent number of opinion pieces which came out disapproving what Montazir al-Zaidi did.
Mr. McClanahan, do you agree with that, that the way that this has been viewed in the Middle East, the way that this is reflected on the Bush administration, that it is now seen, symbolizes the fact that it seems one of the worst U.S. administrations in history?
Well, the incident of the shoe throwing is a very small incident, and Bush's decision not to lose this war, to turn the trends around, to surge the troops, to adopt a different strategy of counterinsurgency will be remembered long after the guy who threw the shoe.
But appearing alongside Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, Bush said the war is not over. Now, that stands in stark contrast to what he said on May the 1st, 2003, just after Saddam Hussein was overthrown, when he announced that major combat operations have ended and that attention could now turn to rebuilding the country.
Well, no insurgency is easily put down. I agree that the war is not over. The trends are moving in the right direction. And as for Bush's earlier remarks, major combat operations characterized by large unit maneuver warfare of the sort to bring down Saddam Hussein were over.
Mr. Offman, how would you describe the state of infrastructure in the country in terms of electricity, clean water, sewage systems, etc.?
Well, it's not a good one, really. I think Americans haven't done much. They have dealt with the Iraqi issue as a business and as security only. They haven't dealt with it as a country having about 30 million people who need all services, who need decent life, who need security. I think they were wrong in their dealing with the population. And just yesterday, we heard from New York Times, we saw that in New York Times it said $100 billion have been spent in reconstruction, but they don't know how it was spent. So I think it has been a mess, and I think that's why neither the different Iraqi government nor the American administration, they couldn't do enough services to the Iraqi people. And that's why the situation now is not good, really.
Mr. Hamzami,
and it's quite poor.
what are your thoughts on that? The report that Mr. Othman is referring to, the Pentagon report exposing the fact that $100 billion of taxpayers' money had been squandered in Iraq. What does that say about the Bush administration's reconstruction effort in Iraq?
As our friend from Iraq just said, definitely and attest to how messy the process of reconstruction in Iraq has been dealt with by the Americans, as well as by different Iraqi forces on the ground as well. And secondly, it's definitely a clear sign that we do have in the US different mechanisms of accountability, of control, of checks and balances, which are in fact very good to have, because otherwise you will never hear about reports coming out of the US stating that there has been some mismanagement, if not corruption, in terms of managing the Iraqi reconstruction issue. However, let me just add one more point to the issue of reconstruction. Yes, there are some positive developments in Iraq. There have been some positive developments primarily with regard to the security situation, but we still have a great deal of deficits in Iraq as well. The political process is, yes, in place. However, it lacks representation from different powerful groups on the ground. We have an emerging state with different reconstructed state institutions, but it's yet to expand its authority over Iraq in a systematic way. So we have a lot of deficits. So the picture is not simply positive. It's quite a mixed gray picture which we are looking at while the Bush administration is leaving office.
Well, it's time for a short break now, but when we come back, we'll take a closer look at the options for President-elect Barack Obama in dealing with Iraq. Stay with Inside Story.